And so the insinuating idea was, you can't say no. So that was just where a lot of destruction and abuse occurred, and it's really unfortunate.
So Hoyt, it's been more than 20 years since you escaped from the Eternal Values cult. What made you want to tell your story now?
Well, I've been wanting to tell it for a long time. It just kind of came together finally. Those are the things you can't control, right? But I started talking about it in 2001, mainly because technology plays its part in a sense, because at that time, Google was just emerging, and the only things that were on the internet were either negative things or me defending this group. And when I knew at that time and place that if I made a connection with someone, it might be a nice girl or something, and said, let's go meet for a coffee, she would Google that, and I'm like, oh my God, this thing, I'm not gonna be able to run from this. So I figured my only defense is to go create a new narrative, and that meant I had to go public. And so that started me on a journey that has taken 25 years. I never imagined it would end up where it has, but it really was important to me to kind of take ownership of this experience, kind of tell it on my terms finally, and correct things that were existing on the internet that just weren't reflective of where I now look at it.
The group, the cult, was full of incredibly good-looking people. I mean, you were one of probably the original male supermodel. Jackie Adams was an incredibly successful model.
Yes.
What do you think the aesthetics of the members, and why were they important to Freddie Von Myers, the cult's leader?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of Freddie's branding. It's like not everyone in the group was of a supermodel-esque type status by any standard. There were some models, and I unfortunately recruited in a bunch of them. It's just something I live with. But ultimately, it's the type of thing of where Freddie wanted to put on a persona of like beautiful, educated, sophisticated, put together, elegant, and that was, the good poster children to put forward. So that was kind of, but the group was much more complex than that. But when it comes to what his incentives were, I think you have to look at it as kind of a narcissist who takes their self-identity by who they can surround themselves with. And he definitely had a obsession with people that were kind of rich, famous, beautiful, aristocratic type, whatever. I'd never heard of the social register until I met Freddie, so I didn't know that was a thing, but that was kind of the world that he liked to inhabit.
I mean, it was an impossibly glamorous world, especially in those early days. You were at Studio 54, you were invited to Madonna's house, you were hanging out with Grace Jones. Was that part of the appeal for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was from a normal family and from the suburbs. So for me, going to Studio 54 was literally like Alice in Wonderland walking through the looking glass. And I didn't think a place like that existed, let alone I would find myself there and be escorted in there with this person who seemed to have access to all these type of nightclubs. I mean, nightclubs in New York at that time, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I don't think that'll ever be revisited. I mean, that was pre-AIDS. Crazy stuff was happening. And so for me at age 19, 20, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is just something I didn't think existed. I didn't want to ever leave.
Interestingly, inside the cult itself, you were all living this quite monastic life. You were sleeping on a mat on the floor.
Yeah.
Romantic relationships were very much discouraged. But then, as I understand it, something changed, and Freddie was actually encouraging you all to sleep with each other. How did that affect how you felt about the people in the group and the group dynamic?
Yeah, it was really destructive. It's something that tends to emerge in the cultic environment where, now luckily, Freddie was not the kind of cult leader who was trying to sleep with the members himself. He had his own secretive, secondary life that we were not aware of. But we were in our 20s. There were a lot of attractive people. Hormones were kind of, played a factor, and I just think those tensions got to a point where he's like, all right, this is impossible. We'll just have you kind of, rather than involve people outside the group, just do it with each other, which was really, really unfortunate because, first of all, there was more men than women. So the women, I think, were exploited in a terrible way. And the idea was, we're spirit, not body, so you shouldn't be able to be, attached to this. And so the insinuating idea was, you can't say no. So that was just where a lot of destruction and abuse occurred, and it's really unfortunate.
And we should just say, in terms of a place where this was happening in and around an apartment on the Upper East Side in New York,
Yeah, right.
and there were several apartments in the same block that kind of became a bit of a HQ.
Yes, exactly. The 4N was the apex of it all, but yeah, we had 670, I think at one point, 8 or 9 apartments at one point. And so we'd all generally have dinner together, but duties would depend on where people were. We had an office, and a lot of people lived out of that as well. But yeah, it was just kind of, as the group grew, we all kind of lived in as Freddie would say, the chambers in the pyramid. It was reflecting our Egyptian incarnations and all that baloney.
You mentioned that Freddie had his own kind of secret sex life.
Yeah.
I gather that you only discovered when making the documentary that he was actually spending a lot of time sleeping with male prostitutes.
That's correct.
Outside of the apartment. How did you feel when you discovered that so many years later?
Well, I felt really naive. Yeah, I mean, listen, so much of this journey is about recognizing that you become your own worst enemy, because you start to self-center out the things that don't fit the narrative that you loved, that you bought into. Like, I thought I had met this guru type teacher who was enlightened, who was going to school me in becoming a more spiritual person. I thought I'd met like-minded people who shared those goals. Excuse me. And then I thought we were have to leave this incredible footprint behind that was going to make the world a better place. So that narrative, I'll never beat myself up for that. Like, that was an ambitious and noble idea. But it took me 20 years to figure out that it wasn't that. And when I finally did figure it out, all those thoughts of where I saw along the way inconsistencies, hypocritical type of things that were clearly contrary to the narrative, I had centered out either because I wanted to hold on to that narrative because I felt good about that, or I was convinced that those type of thoughts were the dark forces trying to pull me off the path. But when you finally kind of wake up and see it, all those thoughts come rushing back, and you just go, oh my God, how you knew better, you saw it, and you chose not to. And the same thing with Freddie's secret lifestyle. Like, I can look back on it and just go, oh my God, it's so obvious. But you really see what you want to see. And that's where you really become your own worst enemy. And I certainly experienced that firsthand.
Freddie did ultimately die of AIDS in 1990. With quite strange timing, a few weeks before this big Vanity Fair piece
5 days
came out.
before, yeah.
Strange timing.
Yeah.
That Vanity Fair piece was the first time, I think I'm right in saying, that anyone outside of the group really found out what was happening.
That's correct.
You were at the height of your career at the time.
Yeah.
What happened to your career after that?
Well, that is an ironic part of it. And it's actually, I think, probably reflective of our society at that time, because you look at Jackie, who I think Jackie Adams is probably the best thing in the doc. She's just integrity incarnate. She's so great, and she was really the first whistleblower. And she did it through a lot of adversity, and it took a lot of courage. And in many ways, if you look at how we look at whistleblowers today, it's a little bit more receptive. Back then, I don't think she was embraced very well. And maybe part of it was being a woman, which is also not a good reflection of our society, but it kind of torpedoed her career. And I, being schooled by the group, basically gaslit everyone and said, of course, none of that's true, none of that's accurate. I basically would say to people, do you really think, you've worked with me, you know me, do you really think I would be involved with something like that? So that's how gaslighting works. You put it back on the other person and make them feel challenged to even hold this way of thinking, which was clearly something that was alarming. And it actually catapulted my career. People, up to that point, I had been very professional, Ivy Leaguer, showing up on time, polite to everybody. And now all of a sudden I was interesting, and people were booking me almost to see if I might do something strange on set. And that actually, helped my career. Isn't that crazy?
Do you think everyone is equally susceptible to cult leaders? I've talked to a few psychologists in the past about this, and they've said there are certain points in your life where all of us are
Yeah.
quite susceptible. Moments of transition, perhaps it's divorce or you've moved to a new town where I guess your boundaries, your barriers are down.
Yeah.
Does that chime with your experiences
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
observations?
I frame it as what I call the perfect storm. We all have vulnerabilities. They raise their head at different times in our life. And if you intersect with someone who can recognize and exploit that vulnerability, you're kind of screwed. That's really how I try to frame it. And I also look at it from the point of view that the more accurate way to describe my experience was a 20-year cultic relationship with this group. And the reason I frame it that way is because I'm referencing what I would consider a continuum or kind of a spectrum. Not unlike autism, like everywhere somewhere on that spectrum. And so cultic relationships are the type of relationship where you've usually unconsciously given your power away to someone else, and you're trying to please them, trying to seek out their approval, and normally that person's maybe serenaded you to a degree, a lot of flattery, a lot of attention, and you start seeking it out because we all like attention, and then they start to withhold, and then you start to pursue it, and then they start to use that unhealthy power dynamic to potentially control and abuse you. And so we've all had that relationship. So I think if we think of these things as a spectrum, yes, of course, I went through the more extreme case of that, but it seems to just be part of the human condition. And a lot of the work I do now, when I public speak, and I have my own website, where I talk about these type of things, where I just want people to understand that this is information that is valuable to all of us. And it doesn't guarantee protection, but it gives you a lot more assets to be aware of, that if someone approaches you in this way, you can at least have some red flags to know what possibly is happening and recognize there may be some techniques at play, rather than like I did, thinking, oh, this person gets me, they understand me, I feel this connection, not knowing that this could be a tactic. So they're very tricky. So even if you have that information, they might still get around it, but I feel better people having that information than not having it. So that's really the work I try to get across to people.
When you were in the cult, along with your fellow members, you believed that the aliens would be the saviors.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you're laughing at it now, and obviously it sounds, slightly ridiculous from
Although
our
right now they're
vantage point
saying
here.
the aliens have been around for 80 or 90 years, so maybe we're all good. The joke's on all of us. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it wasn't an alien who was your savior. It was your fellow model, Fabio.
Yes.
How did he help you escape?
Well, friends are hard to find, and circumstances like this, you find out who your real friends are. And Fabio really was able to step up in a way that was so extraordinary, because I had very few places I could think of where I could go and someone would not probe me. Certainly my family would have been like, okay, what's going on? And other friendships, I just felt people were very involved, like either married with kids or that sort of thing. So Fabio was having this monstrous career. He was always telling me, he's like, Hoyt, come out to LA, you can become a celebrity like me, anytime. And so he had this open door policy, and when I'd be in LA, I'd always see him. And I thought, where can I go? And I thought, you know what? Fabio's always been non-judgmental, just kind of a loyal friend. And I showed up at his doorstep not knowing where else to turn, to be quite honest. And the way he handled it was so amazing, because he immediately, and I've talked to him about this, he said, I knew you were like a shadow of the person I knew. And he goes, I know also when someone's gone through something traumatic like that, that's not the time to probe them for questions. He goes, I just wanted to give you a safe haven and a sanctuary to figure out whatever it was. And when you were ready, you were going to come to me. And that's a real friend. And I was there for about a year, and he normalized everything. Let's just go to the gym, let's do this. And never allowed me to feel unwelcome, and allowed me to incubate and start to process some of those feelings. And that put me in a position where I could start to finally deal with it.
Do you think you've managed to neutralize the shame and the embarrassment of having been involved in, almost 20 years of your life?
Yeah, I feel like I've made a lot of progress in that area. I think, you ever get completely over it? No, but I don't find I get triggered like I used to at one point. It takes time. My family and friends will tell you it was probably 4 or 5 years where they really felt like I was back. I think when you look at the recovery process, it's one of these things of where initially you can talk about it intellectually, like you can read up, like I had done a lot of self-education, and you can start to understand, okay, this happened, that happened, and I can explain that to you. But for me to kind of emotionally connect to the experience where you would actually feel what I went through, that's taken a long time, and it's probably going to go on for the rest of my life. But I think that's developing the emotional intelligence where you can kind of connect the experience to the words you're speaking takes time, and I definitely encourage fellow survivors to give themselves that grace. There's such a compulsion to just want to fix everything and reclaim your life and start over, and there's really a lot to work through, and give yourself that grace to kind of allow it to unfold in the pace it will, and just not feel that you have to explain anything any more than what, as you're going through it and learning yourself. And it's a work in progress type of thing. I don't think it ever ends.